Hi everybody, good afternoon. Hope you've been enjoying your day. I'm Tony Brown and I'm going to be speaking to you today about debugging and Magento. A little bit about myself. I've been working with and on Magento since 2009. I'm the technical director at Space 48 and as it says, I love learning and collaborating. And just a quick word about the team at Space 48. Don't get opportunities like this very often to show the love, but I'm just really proud of the team that we've got. And I think you guys are awesome. So what am I going to be talking about today in more detail? I'm going to be going through types of debugging, some strategies we can use to help improve debugging as a process, going into some of the tools that we can use, a quick sort of working example, and then also onto Magento 2 and how perhaps that is going to help us, and then at the end any questions and even any suggestions. I mean, we've got a big audience here today, a wide range of skills and experience. This sort of talk is aimed more, I suppose, at the new developers to Magento, but if I've missed any tools or ideas, because there's always new stuff coming out, please do share that at the end. So why? Why am I doing this? Well, we're not perfect, as Mr. Manners was saying earlier on, but you know, it hardly ever works first time, right? There's going to be bugs all the time, but if we look at this process, let's see how we can improve our efficiency. So I've just highlighted here the sort of types of debugging that there is. I mean, it is programming, it's problem solving. Bugs during development, it's code, fix, right? And then you've got the unfortunate bugs that get through any processes that we've got in place and unfortunately get to live. Classified them a little bit further down to sort of like site down, awooga moments, performance issues, and then features broken sort of catches everything else. As I started trying to prepare for this talk, I was sort of diving down into sort of workflows you could go through, decision making, all this type of stuff. There's just way too much. So what I've just brought together today is some strategies that could apply across any of these areas, but non-specifically. So we'll go into the strategies now. So the two main questions that I believe should always be asked when you've got a debugging scenario is what has changed and are we seeing any errors? So firstly, what has changed, this could be as simple as there's just been a deploy gone out, or there's been a spike in traffic, or a merchant that's just enabled a new feature in the admin that they weren't using before, or a new product type or something like that. Without this information, you could waste time looking in the wrong area. So reach out to your team, reach out to the merchant, or if you are the merchant within your team, and see if anything's changed. Similarly with the errors, it's a rich source of information that's going to, again, point you in the right direction. Without that information, you could waste time. The next thing there is saying, it's like the core principle of debugging, right? To be able to be as efficient as possible, we need to focus in on the area where we need to. So how can we do that? We need to eliminate as much as possible in each iteration, each step of what we're trying. So specifically with Magento, two of the easy steps that you can do there, if you've got a front-end issue, you could isolate the theme by just rolling back to the core theme. And if the issue has gone away or remains, then you know where the problem potentially exists. Same again with modules. You could, in one basic first step, is just remove all the customized modules and see if the problem remains, or enabling them, disabling them to try and focus in on the problem. One quick word of warning on disabling modules. I would recommend either deleting or removing the files out of app etc modules rather than setting the status to disabled, because sometimes some remnants can exist and it can trip you up. The next thing, utilizing logging. It's a bit more of there's double meaning this one. So when I say errors, you should get visibility of logging, and that comes in with monitoring. But logging as a tool is more of a traditional way of debugging things. Throwing logs in there and being able to sort of see the state of your application. I would say though, there's better tools to achieve this, particularly using Xdebug, which I'll mention in a moment. And then just a word on tools. I think this was mentioned again earlier, but just use your tools wisely. You know, there's a vast array of them. Sometimes when you get the new shiny cool kid in town, then you might overuse that, believing it can solve every problem, but you know, use your tools wisely. The next one is more of a preventative measure, talking about defensive coding. So what do I mean by that? Assume nothing. So with your code, you could be getting objects in and variables in some sort of expected state, but you can't rely on that. You need to make sure that your coding is getting decent error trapping in there to ensure for those edge cases. And further to that, if you are putting decent error trapping in, make sure the error messages that you're putting in there are descriptive. You know, an error has occurred is useless, right? And I've seen that somewhere. I can't remember where it was, but they should be shot. So, yeah, that's that. Now, the next bit I'm going to go on to is probably one of the more important things, and I guess it's kind of obvious, but I still see it from time to time and have done over the years, is collaborating. I think sometimes when developers are in the moment and they're suddenly under pressure, that they don't want to reach out. It's like an admission of failure or something, or they don't want to seem like they don't understand. But really, this is the place you're going to learn stuff. You know, if I've heard people say, you know, it doesn't make sense, and I think, great, they're going to learn something out of this one. You know, they're frustrated at the time, but reach out, collaborate with people, don't let that hold you back. I've even seen circumstances where a developer has come to me and started to articulate the problem, they're going through it, and actually you can see the light sort of pinging off there, and they've solved it themselves just by them trying to articulate a problem to someone. So this next point here is kind of an extension to that. Try and step back regularly from your code. You know, you get a problem there and you can start hacking away at hack, and before you know it, you've wasted hours of time. If you can get into a more reflective mode more often, then you can sort of reevaluate where you're at instead of just because you can go down the wrong paths. Further to this, you know, further to collaboration, I guess, is reaching out to the community. I mean, Googling for something, right? If you've got an error, do that first. Magento has been around for a long time. There's more than likely someone else that's had the same problem and will be able to lead you in the right direction. Magento Stack Exchange, fantastic resource. By all means, post questions on there, but search first. You know, don't want to muddy the water there. And Twitter, again, an excellent resource just to reach out to the community. The last point there, it's obviously a bit of a theme today, come up numerous times, is automated testing. I know a lot of people aren't doing automated testing yet. One of the things to take from it, even if you're not there yet, is that particularly with TDD, it encourages small iterations and testing your code. So don't get, I often see certain developers just get ahead of themselves and they're writing too much code before they're running it. And then it's a load of debugging to try and figure out where they're up to. So smaller iterations, but the rest of the benefits that automated testing can give, as Ben was saying there, you know, you can put more trust in the code that you're doing. You get visibility if you've broken something else further away from your code. Magento 2008 was when it was created, and during that time, the PHP community has moved along a long way, and it's a testament to what the guys have done in Magento 2, that it is architected in such a way and it's pushing forward things like automated testing. So yeah, I don't think we can get away with it for much longer if we're already. So onto the tools. Now, there's a lot here. I'm just going to start with tools in Magento. Some basic features. Hopefully most people will be familiar with all these. So if you've got a problem in the front end and you're not quite understanding why you're seeing such behavior, you can switch on the template path hints. It'll screw up your front end completely. Don't ever do this on live unless you've got the IP filter in there, but the profiler and login, these are two that are sort of There are better ways I'm going to go on to using these, but they are still useful in their own right. Enabling the profiler and seeing exactly how your Magento install is performing. It will break down and give you information on the memory usage and the timing. Logging, as we mentioned earlier, that's there for you to enable to debug stuff. Developer mode though, definitely recommend always developing with this mode on. In any environment other than production it should be on, and including switching display errors on in PHP. We want to get visibility of errors as soon as possible. Without this mode on, you're risking smaller errors slipping through because they're not in your face. If you've got developer mode on, you're going to get visibility of it straight away and be able to fix it before it becomes a commercial issue. So onto additional tools, and as I say, there's a lot of these, so I'll try and get through them as quick as possible. The big four that make a difference to my day-to-day is getting a good IDE. PHP Storm, at the workshop yesterday, there was like a show of hands who was using it, and it was the majority. But as a tool, it is fantastic. It really helps with a big system like Magento to be able to navigate around a lot more easily. Seeing Vinay there flying through with all the shortcuts and stuff, I'm sure it opened a few people's eyes on that day how efficient you can get with that system. And that coupled with Magento, again, that helps you to get to the code because it's got like better auto-completion, hooks up the short class names to the real class so that you can click around more easily. It's got boilerplate code. You can create modules with Magento rather than having to type it all out yourself. A great tool. Xdebug. You could do a whole talk on this, I'm sure. It's a tool that I don't use all the time, but when the need arises, when there's a bug and you're trying to track it down, really is, I've not used anything better to be able to dial in and see where the issue actually is. Being able to halt execution and step through line by line and see the state of your application, what the object variables are, and even to be able to, when the execution is paused, you can even issue commands in real time there and then. So you may be paused at a particular line, perhaps around a collection, and you could want to see what the SQL was that was building that collection. So at that moment in time, you can execute an instruction just to pull that out without, having to put a log in and then run the code again and view the log. A lot more steps there to achieve the same thing. And Xdebug, I think that's one of the key things that's helped me understand more of the internals of Magento and get an idea of how the things are hooking together. Because you can even see, when you've got execution paused, you can see the full tree of where the requests have come from, like nested down into the methods. So it really has been a great tool for myself to learn more and really encourage its use. N98 Mage Run, a command line tool that's got, I'm not going to be able to go through all the features of that, but around debugging, an example would be with the crons. You can run cron jobs individually, Magento crons, from the command line with the N98 module. Moving on to some others, Commerce Bug is a piece of software from Alan Storm. His name's been mentioned a few times today, and it's been around a while. It's a great tool that works on the front end, a debug toolbar that gives visibility of things such as layout handles that apply to the page, the events that are fired off on that page, the state of the layout XML, and that is a useful tool in itself. I've actually found this very useful in training and working with people that are new to Magento because it really helps to reinforce what's going on behind the scenes. So it's definitely worth checking out. Z-Ray, although I'm English, should it be Z-Ray? I'm not quite sure. I've not used that myself, but that only works with Zen Server, and I believe does similar stuff to Commerce Bug, but goes deeper. So if you are using Zen Server, perhaps check that out. Magento Debug. This has got some crossovers to some other tools, like N98 in its features. However, the one unique thing with that is that if you're into doing still manual logging of the state of your application, this supports Chrome, PHP, and Firebug, so that you can pull those logs directly into your console in your browser, which again can shorten time while you're debugging things. The next two are two AOE modules, which are actually just sort of extensions to the two inbuilt pieces of functionality there. We'll go way further in how they look and how useful they are. So if you do find yourself using those regularly, please check out the extensions, because they'll help. New Relic. This is another tool that we use a lot at Space 48, and it's been great for giving us visibility and early warning on problems before they become a bigger problem. It's monitoring software that not only looks at the servers, but also the application performance, and also visibility of errors that are going on. And you can set in place the like a threshold by which performance, if it goes above it, then you're going to get alerted and warned about it. Same with errors, same with any other metric. But not only that, when it does go above a certain performance threshold, it's going to give you a full trace of all these transactions, so that you can see exactly where the potential issues are, be it like maybe a slow third party that's being called or something. It'll stick out, and you know with great confidence straight away where the problem is. So again, really getting you into the crux of the problem as soon as possible. The next piece of software I've not actually used myself, it's called Blackfire. This was actually, I've heard of it before, and it's about, again, looking at your system and being able to break down and see where bottlenecks are to be able to increase performance. This was mentioned this week. I believe the guys at Mage Yoav's team, used this to identify a slight bottleneck in the latest patch that came out, and they've submitted some code to be able to get around that. And I believe they're doing a blog post saying how they've used it. So I think it'd be worth looking at that as a piece of software. The ECG coding standard, that's the expert consulting group. So they've shared this coding standard, which is not kind of a coding standard. It uses PHP Code Sniffer, which is traditionally used for like warning about syntax errors or more like styling issues of your code. But they've put in there bad code recognition, if you like. So it was mentioned before about having a model load in a loop. This will actually warn you about that in your IDE if you've got the coding standard loaded. So it's a prevention measure again. Get that in place, and it's going to warn you about things before they become a big problem. And then automated tests, again, as we mentioned that, a lot of people in the community have worked hard to enable us to write tests for Magento. There's the ecom dev team for PHP unit and others. There's Mage spec as well for PHP spec. We should all be testing. I think we're getting that message right.
Yep.
So a quick working example of just an occasion of debugging that I thought I'd share. There was a store that had an order export integration, and this was run via the cron, the Magento cron, via a regular schedule, basically sending orders out via an API, and it stopped working suddenly. So the question, has anything changed? Spoke to the team, we couldn't see any real changes, no deployments or anything. Are we receiving any errors? Well, there was an error that was pointing us to around the cron jobs. So from there on, we looked at the cron schedule table in the database, which stores all of the Magento cron tasks, when they're scheduled for, when they've started executing, and when they've completed. Within there, we could see that there were some errors actually described in there, but the thing that stuck out was that apparently it wasn't running. There were no new jobs being added, and there was no tasks being executed. So from there, it seemed to make sense to check the system cron was in place. Is the cron being run at at all, which indeed it was. So it was like, okay, this is a confusing one. So what we did at the next step was to manually run that command line for the cron to see if, we got any feedback, anything came back from the command line, but it ran like really quick and came back with no response. But looking at the cron schedule table, nothing there. Has anybody ever experienced this problem before? Does it ring any bells for anybody? No. Was half hand there? Nah. Good. Okay. Do you know what? Do you want to make a suggestion as to what it was? Another job timing out. It wasn't actually, but good to know. Right? No, it wasn't that. Actually, what we looked at was the Linux process itself. So the cron job that runs the system cron, we could see in the list of processes in Linux that it was still running. So I guess timing out, that could have been the reason, but we think it was because of an error. So it might have been actually the same reason. But the problem was that it was still running. And what that results in is when you do run a subsequent one, it's got a check in there that says, is this process there on Linux? And if it is, then I'm not going to try and run it again, because obviously it doesn't want to run too many times. So the fix was actually to kill the process. Once we tested that, it just all kicked in again, and the cron schedule table just filled up. So what did we learn from that one? Because that's something we're always looking to do. I think this again has been mentioned today, is always looking how we can improve and learn from any problems that we're coming up against. So as I mentioned, the cron checks to see if it's already running. We definitely were going to monitor that going forward to make sure it wasn't going to get stuck again. We've investigated the errors and managed to clear those up. One other recommendation is there is a scheduler module, again done by AOE, which if there were more further problems we might have gone with that, but we didn't in this case. So on to Magento 2. So what is different there that is going to help sort of our day-to-day, hopefully have less debugging to do. One of the things that Ben was mentioning there is around the XML validation. I like to call it the XML game in Magento 1, where you're trying to get something to work, it's not working, and you know it's in the XML, and you're trying to hunt down where it is. But with the XML validation that they've got in there, you will get it in your face. If you're using an IDE, it'll be there and you can see it. But the sort of bigger things that Magento 2 is bringing is these sort of bringing it forward with the modern best practices. So being given methods to customize the code in a more targeted way, this is going to help, particularly around upgrades, that we're going to have less errors being thrown as we're doing the upgrades. And same with this decoupling of the code, this more modern architecture, having things more isolated. This should mean really you're only debugging your own stuff rather than sort of the effect elsewhere, because we're dealing in a more isolated way. Again, around the testing, the bringing it forward like this and having dependency injection, rather than us having to kind of shoehorn it into Magento 1, it's built with that in mind. And as Ben was saying, actually everything should be tested, so we need to make use of that. Also, again, we sort of touched on this morning that we should be reusing code, and the fact that Magento 2 supports Composer and that we can just bring in components, that means we're having to write less code. Another point is actually the way that logging has been implemented. They're actually using monolog, so they've standardized their interface to the PSR standard and have gone with monolog as the solution. So even out of the box, you could swap monolog out. That's as easy as they make it, which is great. But even with monolog, you could, instead of having your logs go into the disk, you could have it go to email or even to another service like Logstash and start to get real good visibility of your errors. Also is the Magento command line tool. Anybody at the workshop yesterday will have got some hands-on experience with that. There is a bit of crossover with, say, N98. It's implemented in the same way as N98 is, using the Symfony command line library. So it's going to be interesting to see how that sort of moves forward. what tools exist for Magento right now? Well, Z-Ray is like a server thing, so that should work. And a company called ZCommerce, I think it's ZCommerce, how you pronounce it. They've got a debug toolbar, but I've not had a chance to try that yet. But the ones I'll be waiting for is Commerce Bug by Alan Storm. As mentioned before, he's saying it's in the works. He's not been... He has actually had it working with Magento months and months ago, but because it was changing so much, Magento 2, changing so much, he was waiting until it was stabilised more. And same for Magento. Enrique has said that that's coming. And yesterday it was shared by Ben that actually one of the core team developers has created a plugin for PHP Storm themselves, and they're looking to actually share that with the community. So that's great that we're seeing more tools that's going to help the developers, because there is a lot of boilerplate code and things in Magento too, so that's great. And then lastly, N98, as I mentioned before, they have created a Magento 2 completely separate version, and they're not making the first one compatible. That exists, although it's only got a small subset of the commands in that version, so we will see how that pans out. Okay, thank you very much. That's me. Any questions?
Yeah, great talk, Tony. One thing that I found useful, it's more of a suggestion than a question, is when we're debugging, trying to get our minds into the state of, is it an urgent bug, and then what tools we can find complement that, or is it a bug while we're currently developing? Do you have maybe a pattern? So what tools, if you're looking at a production-based bug where the site's not down, but maybe an email isn't going out, do you have a set of a toolbox that you use for that? And then when you're actively developing locally, what tools do you use to try and help you debug while it's aiding in your development?
Okay, I guess the main one that we're using for production issues is New Relic. I nearly put some screenshots in, but if you've not seen that as a tool, being able to see if there are any errors coming through or any performance benchmarks, the stack traces that are in there really do help you zero in on the trouble area. It still takes some, it's a new tool, it takes some time to get used to, but that's the main one we use. In development, I guess it's still more around Xdebug, I think is the primary one. As I say, being able to step through the code is just invaluable to be able to see where things are coming from.
And finally on New Relic, how do you go about creating your AppDex score? Because I know I've had issues in the past trying to work out what is performant for a site. How do we know if it's a genuine bug or not?
It's a tough one, that, particularly when you're inheriting sites, because it's already in a certain state. So what we would look to do for those is just a bit of consultation with the client to understand where their expectations are. Are we taking them on where they're dissatisfied with the performance, or is actually that something that they believe that isn't where they want to focus their attention right now? So we would set the AppDex score based off where their performance currently is. And then obviously if it goes above that, then that's a problem, because we've got to manage their expectations and meet them.
Cheers.
Okay. Anybody else? There's a coffee break coming, I know. Yeah, I mean, suggestions, like I said as well, this is a great opportunity, a lot of experience in the room, so...
just to touch on the chronic you mentioned,
oh, yeah.
For anyone else that's doing it, so AOE schedule is something that we wholeheartedly recommend.
Yeah.
Because of the blacklisting and whitelisting of your run tasks, you can have long-running jobs.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if anyone can hear me, but if you do have long-running jobs, then you can separate those from the short-running ones, or the very frequent ones, like the emails that we send out every minute. But on Linux, you can just prefix the command with timeout and 6 hours or 3 hours, so you'll never get caught by it. So if it does run and you don't catch it, it's overnight and your team's not available, Linux will kill the process after 3 hours, and then you can pick yourself back up and start again. So it's an easy thing just to change, so you don't get bitten by it and don't notice it's like.
So just in summary for anyone that didn't hear that, setting a timeout on the command that you've actually got at the Linux level.
Timeout 3H and then bash.
Yeah, makes great sense, and also further recommendation for the AOE scheduler because it does give you much more control. Okay, great, thanks everybody.